Hi everyone, in this video we are going to discuss the nitrogen cycle. And so in order to fully understand the module, the food we eat, we have to understand the nitrogen cycle. So by the end of this video, hopefully you can actually draw this cycle out. You can explain why it's important to the food that we eat, but more importantly, I want you to know what fertilizer has to do with this whole cycle, okay? So keep that in the back of your mind as we actually draw out this big, lengthy mechanism. So we're going to start off by just putting nitrogen gas here at the very, very top. And so we're going to say our nitrogen gas here is going to be our gaseous molecules that occur in our atmosphere. So the nitrogen that we're always breathing in right here. So what I'm going to do after that is draw a line right here to separate the air or the atmosphere essentially from the ground. So this is just our Earth's surface. So what we're going to do first is talk about what happens when the nitrogen comes from our atmosphere and is pumped into the ground, or just is absorbed into the soil. Because basically one of two different things can happen. So it can go like this and come out here and go straight into a tree, right? Primarily it's absorbed in the roots of the tree. And if this process happens, it is because it has interacted with something called nitrogen fixing bacteria. So if the nitrogen gas interacts with this nitrogen fixing bacteria, basically it can go straight over here and it's absorbed by the roots, which increases our plant growth. So this is really neat. Or what can happen is it can come straight down here and it can interact with something called nitrogen fixing, so they both start with the same label, but then this is actually called soil bacteria. And so what this bacteria does is it takes nitrogen gas and it converts it to our ammonium ion, so NH4+. So this is called ammonium, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it. And we would say it's an ammonium ion because of the plus charge. Now from here, what can happen is we can actually decompose it or break it down by a process called nitrification. Now nitrification converts our ammonium ion into a nitrite ion, so NO2-. This is nitrite with an I. Nitrites, sure. And then from here what can happen is we can break our nitrites down into nitrate. So we go to NO3-. So these are our nitrates. And this happens by a process called nitrifying bacteria, or I should say if it is interacted with a nitrifying bacteria. Now, this is really neat because what can happen here is we can take our NO3 and actually break it right back down to our N2, our nitrogen gas. And this is a process called denitrification. And so usually what happens with this is we're able to break our nitrate down and actually produce our nitrogen gas. So it produces, remember, gas is a bubble, so it produces a gas right here, and then it eventually reaches the top of the soil and it escapes and it goes whoosh back out into our atmosphere. So it's pretty neat. So that's the process of denitrification. Now, that is just if we're looking at this full cycle, but there's a lot more to it. Now, the nitrate, instead of going directly to nitrogen gas, can actually do a process called assimilation, and this then can go all the way back over here, again absorbed into the roots and turn into our tree. So this was called our assimilation. Assimilation. I think I dropped a letter there somehow, but you know what I mean. And so we're going from nitrate, and then it's absorbed by the roots again into the plant. Now, the last process that can happen is if a tree or maybe some kind of animal or human, dog, cow, whatever we want to talk about, die. So if these two die, and I'm going to put a little X here, meaning death, okay? If they die, what happens is these bodies or these plants decompose. And so when you decompose or decomposition, these pieces break apart and you actually end up creating more of your ammonium ion. So this is your nitrogen cycle. It seems very complicated, but if you look at it piece by piece by piece, it's actually quite straightforward. And so I also have included in these slides a real diagram for the one that is included in your book. For me personally, I look at this and it seems a little bit messy, and so I like to break it down, like I said, piece by piece. For me, I have to do that in order to learn it. So make sure you can actually write this whole mechanism out without looking at any resources, that you can just cover your eyes and write it out. That's very important to me. Now, moving on. What I want to talk about now is why do we use fertilizers, right? Why, in this process, why do we use fertilizers? Well, we use fertilizers because they increase the yield of crops. Now, when I say they increase the yield of crops, I mean they just increase the crop production. We are able to create more plants, grow more plants, more crops if we use fertilizers. And that's just because, very simplistically, in a very minimal description, it's because they're full of nitrogen. And so they're full of nitrogen, and so what happens is these nitrogen, or these nitrates specifically, are able to be absorbed up into the plants, and the more nitrogen the plants have, the more it grows. It's just as simple as that. But the problem is these fertilizers are bad for the environment, kind of. Okay? It's great because they increase plant growth, so we know that's better because we know plants can take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and convert it to oxygen, so it is good. So there's a silver lining. So I'm going to actually put the word bad in quotes because I don't want you to think that fertilizers are really bad, because sometimes they are really bad. Specifically when you have fertilizer runoff. And so this is a picture of, on the left side, we have our Mississippi River, Mississippi. There we go. We have our Mississippi River on this left side. And on the right side, we have the Gulf of Mexico. And so you can very, very clearly see where the two bodies of water meet. And the reason being is on the left side with the Mississippi River, there's runoff from states from everywhere. I mean, it's all across the country. Even Pennsylvania, runoff from Pennsylvania, fertilizers there, get into the Mississippi River, and then they carry them all the way down until it dumps into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, these fertilizers are full of nitrogen, which increase the growth of plants, including algae. So what it does is it promotes algae blooms, which would be great, except for the fact that algae blooms desperately need oxygen. And so what they do is they use up all the oxygen that's dissolved into that water. And so all of those fish and plants that need the oxygen to breathe, it's now depleted. They cannot breathe. They suffocate and they die. It is absolutely terrible. It's so, so sad. So instead of ending on that with a terrible part of fertilizers, I just want to end on one little part to bring everything full circle. Because if you remember, we started off with a module, the air we breathe. And so hopefully you understand this and you know the answer to this question. What percent of the Earth's atmosphere is nitrogen? Our cycle started with that. So how much nitrogen do we actually have? Go. Did you remember? Fingers crossed. Hopefully you did. We definitely have 78% nitrogen in the Earth's atmosphere. Have a great week. Take care of yourself. Eat your veggies.